Hello, this is Josh Juno. I It seems as though we may be having a little bit of technical difficulty. I think the moderator may have accidentally dropped off. Hopefully, you're seeing this and can hear what I am saying here. Let me try and make sure I can pull this up on YouTube here on my other screen, and I'll see if we're actually seeing me or not. It doesn't look like the YouTube is up and running. Oh, there it is. I think you can see me now. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'll get started with the session. And this session is entitled Migrating to Jakarta EE10. Are you hearing me? Just go ahead and leave a chat. I am looking at the YouTube so that I can see that. I appreciate everyone who's attended today. This is going to be providing a whirlwind tour of Jakarta EE. And thank you. I appreciate the chat. Can you see my screen though? That is one thing I'm a little worried about because the moderator is not in, and I'm not sure that you can see my screen. Just go ahead and type yes, you can see my screen if you can see it, and you should be seeing my slides. Just seeing the video. Okay. So I think someone else is going to have to come in to get me onto the actual uh, screen here for my slides. Looks like the slides might be showing now. I'm just going to go ahead and get started so that we can kind of go through this here. Okay, I appreciate all the patience here today, everyone. And so just a little bit about me. I'm a software engineer, database administrator, and author, blogger, podcaster. I'm always on the Off Heap podcast if you've ever listened to that. If not, go ahead and give it a listen. Got a lot of great speakers on there, including Freddie Gimme, Bob Paulin, and Michael Manila. I'm also an Apache NetBeans committer, and so I'm doing lots of testing on that and using that daily, and also a member of the JCP and the Jakarta EE ambassadors. So, what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to cover what's changed between Jakarta EE8 and Jakarta EE10. Just going to give a little bit of an update and overview of the different specifications, and not all of them either. I'll just go through a handful of those that are probably most widely used. Going to demonstrate some great features of Jakarta EE10, and then I'm going to go ahead and try to go through the process of upgrading from a prior version of Jakarta EE or Java EE for that matter, all the way to Jakarta EE10. And I'll show you just a little bit about what's coming up in the next release. So let's go ahead and we'll get started. So from Jakarta EE8, some of you may have not been even familiar with what that is. So I'll start off by mentioning that Java EE was open source back in 2017 to the Eclipse Foundation, and there became Jakarta EE. And what happened was a couple of years later, Jakarta EE8 was released, and this was just in alignment with Java EE8. It was to get an open source release out the door that was in perfect alignment with Java EE8. After that, we came up with Jakarta EE9, and what this included was name changes from the namespace of JavaX to Jakarta. This was a necessary change to go from the older platform to the new open source platform. So that was a big undertaking with thousands and thousands of lines of code that had to be modified to make that change. That's what we got in EE9. And then 9.1 came out a short while later, and that included support for Java 7, Java 11. And then what we have is Jakarta EE10, which came out most recently, and this now supports Java 17 and includes lots of new features. So if you went to upgrade from Java EE let's say, or Jakarta EE8 to Jakarta EE10 now, you'd be getting a lot more new features. Jakarta EE9 was basically just the namespace change and the update to use Java 11. So let's go ahead and how do we get started with Jakarta EE10? What you would do is just you'd have to download a compatible container. So there's quite a few of them out there now. Just to name a couple, we have got Pyra 6, Clash for 7. There's also Open Liberty and several others out there. And you also have to declare the Maven dependencies in your project POM file for using Maven. Gradle will be a little bit different, but you just have to declare the dependencies, of course. And you can see that it is now Jakarta.platform in version 10 is what I'm putting in my POM files. Why should you upgrade? There's a lot of good reasons to upgrade to Jakarta EE10. So the main reason is that there are modern APIs now in EE10 that will help with the development of REST services and front ends. There's also Java SE17 support, and you'll have to use Java 11 or later. So if you're still on Java 8, you're going to want to migrate your code to Java 11 so that we can go ahead and update to newer releases of Jakarta EE to make use of these new features. So there's some profile changes also in Jakarta EE10, which may be a good benefit for your solutions. The web profile is still available, and it has added some specifications, including concurrency and resource management. Also, there's a new profile, which is targeting smaller runtimes. And this is for developing microservices if you want to deploy to Pyra Micro or Docker to take your container somewhere else. And these will include only specifications that are targeted towards web services development. So it gives you a smaller container so that it's easier, makes more sense financially and everything to upload, download, and whatnot. Of course, the full platform, we've got 22 of 30 specifications updated, and there's one new specification here in Jakarta EE10. So looking at the diagram here, this gives you kind of a visual of what's new, updated, and what's not updated. You can see it's quite a big update for Jakarta EE10. Very worthwhile if you're still using Jakarta EE8 or before. So let's jump through some of these specifications here, and we'll see just what's included in them. So first off, we've got concurrency, and this is now included in the web profile. So if you want to jump from using the full profile to the web, you can still use concurrency. This also includes now asynchronous methods, and there's context changes, including propagation to parallel streams operations, and also the ability to reference context from completion stages and completable features, which would be very helpful. There's the ability to propagate third-party context types as well, and just a complete a modernization of some of the APIs. Just to give you a quick idea of what the code may look like for context propagation, you can see here that the security application and vendor contexts are being propagated into this my context, which is then gone ahead and passed off to the executor, the managed executor that's named my executor here in this particular example. And yes, to answer your question, I see in chat, support for Java 21 will be available in Jakarta EE11, okay? Not in Jakarta EE10. However, that's not to say that some of the vendors that have servers may decide to go ahead and provide JDK 21 support for Jakarta EE10. I'm not sure if that's available yet anywhere, but it's possible. Next up, we'll talk about Jakarta Faces. JSF is no more. It's now Jakarta Faces, and there are quite a few changes with this framework as well. We've got scope binding to a browser window or a tab. So you would use this annotation that's called the client window scoped annotation that would bind the scope of the application to a single browser window or tab. Automatic extensionless mapping, so you don't need to put that XHTML at the end any longer if you don't want to do that. Also, if you are more comfortable developing the front end with just complete Java, you can now do that. Much like something like Vaadin or other frameworks, Jakarta Faces offers this pure Java solution as well. And it's also worthwhile to mention that JSP and managed beans are no longer supported. You should be using CDI beans now for Jakarta Faces. So you know what I'm going to do at this point is jump out and show you an example here of what we do with Jakarta EE 10 and just Jakarta EE in general. I'm going to show you an application that is developed under Jakarta EE 8. This is an application that in the end of this, or later on in this session, I'm going to show you how to update this to Jakarta EE 10. But this would show you just an easy, basic front end here. We've got a data table, which is displaying records from a database. And then we have a form here, which you can use to submit some information. So we'll say that this is J Champions for the first name and test for the second name. And we'll give it an age of 21 because I like that. And then we'll just give it today's date and create the employee. And that should be creating the employee in the database there. And what we do is we can see this code, what's happening here. If I jump into my IDE and I go to this code, you can see that this is what the Jakarta Faces form would look like. And this tab is the employee tab, which is showing a data table using prime faces. This is the UI framework, which helps to make your faces applications look really nice and makes it much easier to work with the widgets, components, everything. I would just definitely highly recommend using prime faces if you're using Jakarta Faces. So what we do here is we have this controller in the back that is going to load the list of employees into this object called items. And what this is in the controller class here, we've got a view scoped controller. This is a CDI bean, and you can see it's accessible by Acme Employee Controller. And what happens is when this controller is initiated, it's calling upon this web service. It's getting a path and creating a Jakarta REST client to go ahead and load these employees into this items. So if I were to go to this URL for the Jakarta service, it would look something like this. Okay, and this is just a basic XML list of all the employees in the database. So the web service is going to the database, retrieving the XML, and then giving it to JSF here, or Jakarta Faces, sorry, and then displaying that data on the screen here. So one thing I wanted to show you that was new with Jakarta Faces here is that we now can, like I said, develop an application using all code. And what you would do something like that is to annotate a facelet class. So you notice we're extending facelet, and I would annotate this class with this view annotation and provide the name of the view that I want to actually register this code to. We're going to make this an application scoped class. And then I have to override this apply method. And then I'm not going to jump through all of the code here, but you can basically see that we built the components, build this root, get the children, and I can go ahead and build this output and all the tags and add it in as HTML. I'm actually adding a command button here and everything. And then in the end, we'll go ahead and display this HTML. I'll show you what that looks like here. So this would be the form register.xhtml. And if I wanted to go ahead and include that this command button is working, now I can add test and it's going to display hello test. So indeed, this is working from Jakarta EE 10 here with now the new ability to develop the servlet, or excuse me, the facelet using Java code. Let's go ahead and jump back to the slides now. Make this full screen for you. And we'll take a look at what is new in CDI. So in CDI right now, if you remember, back in Jakarta Java EE and Jakarta EE 8, 9, if you had an XML, Beans XML file, it was automatically going to include all classes. Now in Jakarta EE 10, the bean discovery mode is now defaulted to annotated. So when you migrate to 10, you want to make sure that you actually annotated all of your CDI beans accordingly, or else they will not show up or they won't work for CDI in your application. Also, something new is the Jakarta Enterprise Lang Model API has been is added to the specification. The Java Platform Module System module info class files are also added to artifacts. And we've also got CDI full and CDI Lite now. It's been restructured a little bit, and CDI Lite allows you to build, build time compatible applications and utilization of new extensions interfaces for you. So this enables you to develop smaller runtime applications here. It consists of most of the full spec, but I list here what's missing. So it's important to mention that you cannot use session scope or conversation scope beans with CDI Lite. You'll have to use something like request scope or view scope. Parts of the Bean Manager API are not there. Per bean archive enablement, interceptors bound with the interceptors annotation, explicit bean archives, around invoke interceptors declared on target classes, portable extensions, decorator specialization, and passivation. Now, you may say, man, well, that's a lot that's missing. But actually, this subset of CDI is very small and not utilized in many applications. So CDI Lite may be a good choice for you if you're going to develop web services. What's new in the expression language? Well, Bean EL resolver updates. You can now use lambda expressions and arrays in coercive fashion. Generics are now included in the API, and method reference can now be used to access method details. So there's been a few adjustments to the expression language, not too big, but a few features to probably migrate for. So JSON binding, let's just give a quick overview. Just if you can recall, if you're not familiar with JSON binding, it's just a standardized binding layer to get Java objects to and from JSON. And it now allows you to serialize and deserialize objects to and from maps, primitive types, makes it very easy to get your Java code and lists and things into JSON and without doing any hard coding. It's really just an API that works quite simply. There's been some new additions here. We've got the dropping of JSONB creator parameters, deprecation of the JSONB property nillable, also the deserialization of null values to JSON value underscore null value. There's now support for polymorphic types and support for parameter type annotation using JSONB type deserializer and JSONB type adapter. So let's go ahead and show you just real quick, a quick demo of what does JSONB do for those of you who are not familiar. So I'll go back to my code here and we'll look at these JSON examples. And you see how I've got these employees in the database. Well, this button here, I should be able to click and it's not going to work because I'm in a demo, of course. But what that should be doing, and I'll show you the code behind it, is listing all this JSON on the screen. What it is doing here is when I load the customers to JSON is actually the method behind that button. What it does is it creates this JSONB builder, and then it takes that list of database objects that has been loaded into the items array, and it will just go ahead and make it to JSON by using this to JSON method, and then I just display the result on screen. That's what would be happening there. What's the next thing here? So if I wanted to create an object from JSON, that's pretty easy to do as well. So what I would have is you would take a JSON string. So you've got the curly braces and all your information for the body of the JSON inside, and you would pass it to this method. And what it does here is I want to create this Acme employee Java object. And so what I have to do is use this JSONB builder, and I create this JSONB object. And from there, I can go ahead and invoke from JSON. I'll bring that JSON string of text in, and I just go ahead and specify the class that I want to coerce it to. Now, of course, it has to line up with all of the fields in that class. But as long as you've got enough data to go into those fields, it should work. And then you'll go ahead and create that object. Very easy to create objects to and from JSON in that manner. Let me go ahead and go back here for a second, and I'll just do this. And now you can see the problem was that my session was expired. I had sat here for too long. So now you can see that I've got the JSON appearing on the screen. So now I have proved that this does indeed work. And if I wanted to write these employees out to a JSON file, I actually can do that as well by clicking that button, which would enable the writing of employees to JSON. Let's see what that does. So what I'm doing here is I'm building the employees JSON by getting those objects from the database. I create an array. I go through all of the objects here, and I create this builder and add the different JSON objects using the builder. When I'm done, I've got this JSON array, okay? And then I can take this JSON array and I can write it using this JSON writer. And I'm going to write it to this file called employees.json. And when I do that, it's going to store that JSON on the disk. So you can actually get this file and ship it off somewhere if you wish to use it. Okay. All right. Let's go back and let's see what we have next. JSON processing. This API, if you're not familiar with it, is used to transform, the JSON data using an object or streaming model. So you can actually parse and go through and get to different portions of JSON or modify JSON in an API programmatic manner. Some examples: you can use the JSON object builder to build a JSON object. You can call upon the object builder method to create a JSON object builder. And similarly, you can call upon the create array builder method to create a JSON array. And some of the latest additions of JSON processing is that there's some new APIs introduced for creating some JSON value objects from primitive types. We also have a standard property added to handle duplicate keys if they're found. And there's clarified behavior of JSON object builder build and JSON generator closed. So one of the latest additions, which came in Java EE8, Jakarta EE8, was the JSON pointer and patch. So I wanted to just give a demo about what this does. So it's a very powerful thing. What it allows you to do is point to a specific element in JSON and just change it. You can take out the old element, put in a new one. You can patch, is what they call, point to different areas in the JSON. Very easy to do. Let me show you how that works really quickly. So if I go back to my code here, I'm looking at these elements here, and I'm saying that this is element 0, 1, 2, 3. And so if I wanted to patch element 1, let's say, and I want to change it to something like JChampions, then I can do that as such. And when I click this button, you can see what it's done is it's taken the elements here, and I've modified and added JChampions right here as the first element. Let's see how this was done here in code. So I've got the JSON P pointer form. Basically, you've just got input text, which is a string. And when I click this button, which is going to do the actual pointing and replacing, I'm getting the objects, and I'm creating this pointer to the text that I've passed, which is the 1. And then I'm telling it to replace in the employee array and create this value of, if I've passed in a replacement string, then we'll use that replacement string. If not, then it's going to change it to JSON master. So I've named it JChampion, so that's what it replaced it with. And then I'm just setting the search result here when I get the array back. So you're using the pointer.replace, you're passing an array, and then you're telling it which value to replace it with. So that's pretty powerful if you want to change JSON. So let's go back to the slide presentation. And another spec overview is security. This is providing standard security now. This was available with Java EE 8. And then, of course, in Jakarta EE, it's got the ability to apply across multiple identity stores. So you can have security from a database or using LDAP or embedded in your application. And it uses annotations for easy development, helps you remember the caller. There's using cookies or identity stores. It allows for easy group to role mapping, uses standard expression language for accessors, and there's a simplified HTTP authentication mechanism interface now, and this can be used with basic form or LDAP. Now, in Jakarta EE10, there's been new ability to utilize OpenID Connect, which is great for all those who use this out there in the real world, and new wrappers for the HTTP authentication mechanism and the identity store. So I can show you really quick how this code looks. If I go back to my example here, you can see at the top I've got this login, and I click login. All right, and let's say I wanted to log into this application here. Let's type in a username and password. It's incorrect. Okay, so what am I doing here? Let's see. So I want to go to this login form I've created here. I'm going to just basically take a string, input text in for the username, the password, and I submit it. And it's submitting to this authentication controller, which is just a CDI bean that's request scope. What it's doing here, though, is I'm using this security API, and I'm going to this continue authentication method first. And what this does is it says, okay, let's get the security context and authenticate this using the credentials that I've passed in. So it's going to create this new username password credential object, passing in the username and the password, and it's going to go ahead and authenticate that. And how it does that is it goes ahead and uses this identity store that I've got in my application. Okay, so in order to validate that result, what it's doing is it's looking at this method. And of course, you don't have to embed your passwords and usernames in your application like I am here. You would want to use an LDAP store or something else in this particular portion of the code. But for here, I want to say, okay, my name is Duke, and if it equals Java 2020, let me in. So let's see here. And that also tells you how old this code is, right? All right, I'm in. I'm authenticated as an admin here. Okay, so this is a simple API, very easy to use and standard. That's the most important thing. We're using Jakarta EE, right? We're using the standards now. So here we are with the standard security mechanism for authenticating your users. Jakarta REST. Everybody knows what Jakarta REST is. It was JAX-RS in the past, so I'm not going to give too much an overview of it. Restful Web Services for Jakarta EE. Some of the latest additions, there's better JSON-B alignment. Context is now deprecated. There was kind of a confusion if you should use @inject or @context. And so now context has now been deprecated, and we're using the CDI automatic provider extension loading. There's also support for multi-part form data. So in other words, if you want to submit a picture or something, you can do that. And this uses this new object that's the entity part. There's also a default exception mapper if one has not yet been provided. So let me show you really quickly how do I go ahead and I see your question there, James, and just backend or can JSON RPC client-side app work? That's a good question, and I'm not 100% sure on the answer for that one, but I'm pretty sure that you can do client-side work if you use JavaScript as well. You are going to have to kind of parse through the JavaScript and do your things on the client side that you would normally do, but you can definitely use the web service or Jakarta REST to call into some code, which would do the JSON work in the background there for you. I hope that answers your question. If not, then I can always get back to you afterwards. So let's go ahead and I'm going to show you what I would do to get a image into the database. So I've got this I've got this service. As I had mentioned, my application here that I'm using for the demo, it contains a client and a couple of services in the background. So it's using this employee event service and this employee service. The employee service talks to the database, and it's using the employee service to get all of the data and to make calls to the database and back to do all the transactional work. What I'm doing here is I'm going to submit this picture. I'm just going to use the command line to do this to show you how it can be done. But what's important here is that now in the Jakarta REST code, you can see I'm consuming this media type multi-part form data. Okay, couldn't do that before with just Jakarta REST. And what I'm taking in here is a user ID picture and the multi-part form data. And what it's going to do is it's going to obtain this entity part object here. And it's going to get the file name. And what it will do here is it's going to just basically show me some information about this picture for this brief demo here. So let me go ahead and fire up this thing here so I can show you how it works. Okay, so as you can see, it's gone ahead and submitted this picture, and it's going to return me some information. And I can see in the server that the file name is the file name, and it's showing me the multi-part data content because that's what I'm having it do. I could have this upload to a database. I could have it stored somewhere on the server. Whatever you want to do here, that's up to you. But it's now possible to do just right out of the box with Jakarta EE 10. Okay, so that's all I want to go over for the API overview. Um, the important thing that we want to take away is that there's been a lot of new features added to Jakarta EE 10, not to mention the fact that you can use Java 17 now, which is very important. We don't want to be using Java EE 8, or excuse me, Java 8 any longer for our applications. We want to update to a newer version of Java so we can make use of some of these newer features that are in Java, right? And it's also more secure. That's important. So there is a few different ways that you can go ahead and upgrade your application to Jakarta EE 10. Now, my favorite is the manual upgrade, okay? This is enabling you the widest range of possibilities. So I would say my recommendation would be if you're planning on taking an application from Jakarta EE or prior, and you want to continue to develop this application into the future, you're going to want to do probably a manual upgrade, or at least a partially manual upgrade, so that you can make sure that code has been updated, the APIs have been updated, everything is in functional manner, deployed to the Jakarta EE 10 container, and fully functional. There are some utilities that you can use to help you along the way, but I'll show you how to manually upgrade the application. Let's go ahead and see also the utilities that can be used. This just names a couple of them. There's also more out there, but there's this thing called the Eclipse Transformer, which enables you to basically point to an artifact or a directory that contains Jakarta EE or Java EE code, and you can just upgrade it automatically by running it through the transformer. And what it will do is go through and do those namespace changes from Java X to Jakarta where it needs to be done. It will automatically take place. And there's a thing called the Pyra Advisor that I'll show you in a minute. Excuse me. There's a tool called Open Rewrite and Windup you can use to go ahead and specify exactly what you'd like to change in your application. And then you can just pass a WAR file, jar, or the directory to this Open Rewrite, and it will do the migration for you. There's a little bit more work involved with that because you have to do some configuration files and whatnot. And there's this thing called the Tomcat Migrator that I'll show you as well. This is more for those applications, in my opinion, that you're not looking to upgrade or make any changes to in the future, or at least that you're not looking to do much with. The other exception here is if you've got an application that is using APIs that cannot be upgraded to Jakarta EE10, you may want to use this Tomcat Migrator. What it will do is you just point it to your archive and say, upgrade this, and it will go through and run through all the dependencies and all the code and upgrade it to make it usable on a Jakarta EE10 server. Okay. There's also IDE upgrade options like IntelliJ has an upgrade utility. Basically, what this does, and from what I've seen, I'm not very familiar with it. I'm kind of a NetBeans guy. But what IntelliJ does in this case is it will go ahead and look for all those changes that are needed from JavaX to Jakarta, and it will make those automatically for you. Okay. So that's what will happen. So here are the steps for manually upgrading an application. You'll want to modify your dependencies. And this is probably the most painstaking part because if your application contains a number of third-party dependencies, you're going to have to look and see what the latest version of that dependency is. What's the latest version of the library? Is it compatible with Jakarta EE10? Make sure it is. And then you can pull that from Maven or however you'd like to get it, download that dependency and add it to your application. But you'll need to do that for every one of those dependencies that you're using. The next thing you have to do is modify your XML files to utilize the Jakarta EE10 schema updates. Okay. And then you also make the namespace changes, of course, to all your Java imports. So anywhere in your code that says import javax dot whatever, in most cases, you'll want to change that to Jakarta dot whatever. There are still some cases where JavaX is the actual import in the newer version, but that's just if not pieces of code that are part of Jakarta EE10. That's just other libraries that you may be using that are still JavaX. So you need to be careful when you're making those changes. Then you'll need to modify your XHTML files with Jakarta EE10 namespace updates. Okay, and this is not hard to do. And actually, your application will still work if you don't do this. But it's a good practice to upgrade to these new namespace updates at this point. And then you need to address any code changes that need to be made. So some annotations, as I mentioned before, have been made obsolete now. There are some things in the code that will no longer work. Very minor things in the APIs have changed that would make your applications no longer work. You may need to rewrite some portions. And also, if you're depending upon a third-party library that is no longer going to work with Jakarta EE10, you may have to upgrade that thing either manually if it's open source, or you'll have to use a tool like the Tomcat Migrator or something to update that to make it work. I've actually in my work, I've run across a couple of times when I cannot get one of my dependencies to upgrade to Jakarta EE10. One specific one would be if I was using an old Prime Faces layout. They don't support them anymore. The good thing is they're open source in most cases, so you can go ahead and you can make those changes if you really want to stick with that layout. The other alternative is to go to something else, use a different API. So there are some code changes that may have to be made. And lastly, recompile and deploy to a Jakarta EE10 compatible container. So let's go ahead and go through these different steps here. I'm going to show you what I've done with my application in order to make it change to Jakarta EE10. So what I'm running here is Pyro Server 6. I'm going to stop that really quick so I can show you a different demo application. And this demo application is still on Jakarta EE8, okay? So I'm going to run this on Pyro Server 5. And then I'm going to go to the code and show you. Let's go ahead and we'll run this. Okay, So this simple application is very basic. And I just have a quick login. Once I'm in, it enables me the ability to add a first name, last name, date, and select a reservation type, and then click reservation, create. And it will create this reservation for either a hotel or a restaurant. The other thing it does is it sends an asynchronous event using CDI to wherever I want it to go, whether it be the hotel manager or the restaurant manager, to let them know, hey, here's a reservation coming your way. I want to upgrade this to Jakarta EE10. So here is the code base that's reservations 1.0, which is actually still in Jakarta EE8. First thing I need to do is look at the POM file. So let's go ahead and inspect this POM. And you can see here I'm using Jakarta EE8. I've got this property set up. And if I go down here and plug it in, you've got Jakarta platform, and that would be 8, right? And then prime faces I'm using, I could use an older version here. I'm actually using the newer version, but you can see here that I'm using just the straight prime faces version, exactly how it comes. Now, when you upgrade to Jakarta EE10, you have to specify a classifier so that you load the correct version of prime faces, and I'll show you that in a minute. I'm also using OmniFaces 3.2. OmniFaces is a great utility library if you're using Jakarta Faces. So I only have a few dependencies here, so I don't have to do too much work in this application. But if you've got more, you'll have to run through each of those dependencies to see where it makes the upgrade. And something I recommend you doing is going to the actual Maven Central, plugging in your dependency that you have, and checking, okay, so I've got this Maven War plugin. What's the latest version? So see if you can go to the latest version, if that's a possibility for you. And like OmniFaces, I told you I went to the website, and most of the websites for the dependencies that you have are going to have something like this, tell you what they're compatible with. So I know I'm going to have to switch to 4.x to make it work with Jakarta EE10, right? So you're going to want to download one of those. And you can see down here in the build, I'm going to have to change this Maven compiler plugin probably to a newer version because I'm using Java 11 in this Jakarta EE8 application. Same with the War plugin and the dependency plugin. Okay, so we're going to have to migrate that. And so now I'm going to show you the Jakarta EE10 version so that we can compare them. So you can see here that I'm now using Java 17. I'm setting up this property to use Java 17. I'm going to use Jakarta EE10. And I'm, of course, using Prime Faces 13, which is the latest. And you can see I've got this classifier now for Prime Faces. And I have to specify classifier Jakarta. If I don't, it's going to pull regular 13, which is in use for the older versions of Jakarta EE, and it's not going to work. So you have to specify that classifier. And I've also upgraded to OmniFaces 4.3, which is compatible with Java 17 and Jakarta EE10. I've also got this Maven compiler plugin, which is updated for Java 17 usage. Same with the War plugin and the dependency plugin. So this is probably where you're going to spend a lot of your time when you're updating. The next thing you need to do is update all these XML files, okay? So what I mean by updating the XML files is this portion up here. The schema location is no longer the XMLNS jcp.org. We're now looking at the new schema for Jakarta. So we're going to need to upgrade them to something like this. Okay, so it's pretty basic and easy to do. And one of the things that I've done in my applications is you just go through and you write down all of the new schema locations on a notepad next to you or something, and then you just go to each of your XML files one by one and update them accordingly. You have to, of course, get the correct schema file as well. So we can see this is Beans 3.0, and back up in Jakarta EE8, I was using 2.0, right? Same here with the faces config. So I've had to update that to use the new schema, faces config 3.0. This Glassfish Web, that's a NetBeans thing, so that's really not need to be touched for this upgrade. Web does, of course. So you can see in Jakarta EE8, I'm using web version 3.1. And here's an interesting thing to note as well. I'm using these context parameters here that have this JavaX prefixes, right? So this is using the Java EE8, the Jakarta EE8, Jakarta EE9 schema, not 9, 8 schema. 9 is where they changed it, right? Slipping up because I'm talking too fast. So JavaX is still in use here. We have to make sure we change those as well. So let's go down to my Jakarta EE10 application, and you can see I've changed the schema location and the updated to 5.0, right? And now we also have Jakarta as the namespace. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is update the Java. So I've got all these imports, and I need to update these to jakarta.ws.rs. Pretty easy to do. You need to pick and choose and be careful because in some cases, like I mentioned, there are still some libraries that use JavaX. But basically, what you can do is a find and replace. This is really what I've done. Find and replace. You can look for the JavaX and you can replace it with Jakarta. And you can just look in the Java files. And you can make sure you put that that dot at the end so that it's knows what it's looking for. And then this will tell me, tell me not any matching files, but it's probably because I didn't find it correctly. But what the IDE will do is it will list all of the files that contain those changes, and you can go ahead and one by one select what you want to switch, or you can just replace all. So what I did was a replace all, and I knew I wasn't using any other third-party libraries that were going to be calling on JavaX namespace at all. And so I did a replace all. I got the JavaX migrated to Jakarta very easily, quickly, and you're done. So that part is pretty easy. And the same can be said with the next portion where we're looking at these namespaces here, these URNs here up at the top. This needs to change to Jakarta, and I'll show you how that looks here. Jakarta faces.html. Looks a little bit different, but that's what we changed to when we're using Jakarta faces under Jakarta EE10. And it's pretty easy to do this as well because you can basically go to your entire web pages and just do a replace all, find and replace using your the IDE to get this done. And make sure you include the entire string here and do the replace that way so that you're not replacing things in your code on accident. Of course, when you're done, you're going to want to save things and double check and make sure you don't have any errors throughout. Build, clean build, make sure everything looks like it should be working correctly. The last thing you'll need to do is once you have all your Jakarta namespace declared and compile your code, make sure you have no errors because like I said, some of the APIs change. You may have to address some errors. And there's still also a minor chance that some of the APIs won't work under Jakarta EE10. You may have to actually take them out and use new ones. So what I'm doing here is I'm changing back to my PyRS6 server, which is Jakarta EE10 container. And I'm going to go ahead and show you that this application is now running under that new container. There we go. And and I'm in. And very easy to really migrate your application. I would say that most applications shouldn't take you too long to update to Jakarta EE10 doing this method, the manual method. And that way you can really be sure that you're getting everything you need to get in order to make your migration work properly. So something that you can do, like I had mentioned before, is use some other tools to help facilitate your upgrade. There's the Eclipse transformer. This is going to be used at the command line, and you would basically be able to automatically migrate code, a code base, or like a WAR file or a jar file from that Java X namespace to Jakarta just by running it through the transformer. You can also use this thing called the Pyro Upgrade Advisor. And you would do this from the command line as well. It uses Maven. And what it will do is very nice. It advises you of different locations you're going to need to look in your project in order to make changes here. So let me show you here. I've got this already typed in here, Maven Fish Pyro Advisor. And you'll get this off of my my presentation when I upload it, or you can just go and find it online. But basically, you run it in the project root, and this will give you all of its advice. I can't say that it's going to do anything for you. It doesn't do anything for you other than advise you some things you need to change. So in this case, this is telling me that Jakarta Persistence 3.1 gives you the new UUID, so you can change your code there if you want to. Something that's more useful be down here. This is telling me that, okay, I'm using this namespace of xmlnsjcp.org still. I need to change that. I can run through each of these advisor lines and help go through and change my application. This also tells me that you've got an empty beans XML file. So something to remember there. What did I say earlier is that if you've got an empty beans XML, it's automatically going to ignore any classes that are not annotated with a CDI annotation. So you want to make sure that you've got CDI annotations on all the CDI beans that you want to go ahead and use. So Vincent has a comment: with the Spring Boot upgrade to V3, I had to update the Java X packages to Jakarta. It was quite trivial. Yes, thank you. And that's a good thing to note, is pretty trivial. Replace all, especially if you're using an IDE. Most IDEs, like I said, IntelliJ even has its own, replace method that goes ahead and replaces all these things automatically for you. Or you can search and do it manually. It's not a big deal. But do be careful that you don't change anything that's supposed to stay Java X. Another important note, thank you, Vincent, for your comment, is that Spring does use Jakarta. And that's very good. They're using Jakarta EE 10, and everything is kind of moving forward. So that's another good reason to upgrade to Jakarta EE 10 if you're not there already. Another tool that you may want to use is the Tomcat Migrator. And this is, I'm not going to show you exactly what the output looks like, but I can show you right here that the, go back, the line of code you would use, you just use like a jar to go ahead and apply it to a directory or a WAR file or something of the sort to go ahead and convert it. What this line of code is doing here is it's taking everything in the Reservations EE8 project and migrating it, and it's going to copy it to the Reservations EE10 location. And it should enable you to deploy directly to a Jakarta EE10 compatible container. Now, I'm going to tell you, I tried this in Jakarta EE8 here on this project, and it did not work. There was a error that it threw when I tried to deploy it to 10. So I can't say for sure that it's going to work, but that's another utility that's out there and something very useful, especially in the case where you've got older dependencies that cannot upgrade to 10, EE10. You're going to want to run them through this migrator to kind of migrate them for you in the background and make sure it works. So with all that said, there's some documentation and resources out there that are quite helpful. If you go to this OmniFish repository on GitHub, they've got some great examples of migrating from EE8 to 10. And they run through these different tools as well. Very useful. Like I said, the Pyro Upgrade Advisor, there's a blog post and there's some information on that thing online if you want to get more information about that. So what's coming in Jakarta EE11? Well, it's important to note that this is targeted for June and July 2024, so it's coming up quick. Before you know it, it'll be here. Support for Java records, which I can't wait for that. Support for virtual threads, Jakarta Data 1.0, and Java 21 support. So, and more than that is coming as well. So that's just a couple of the bullet points for what's coming up in Jakarta EE11. So you want to make sure you make this migration to Jakarta EE10 as soon as you can, so that you can go ahead and start to make use of these new APIs. If you don't start to migrate your code to EE10 now, you're not going to be able to work on your containers unless you're paying for support, most likely in the future, because lots of the containers are moving forward now to work with 11 and forward with Java SE, and they're not going to be continuing, free support for these older applications. So important to upgrade, and plus very much more secure. So does anyone have any questions? I'm not sure if my moderator has been able to join back in or not. So Vincent has written, will there be AI Live in the next version like Spring AI? It's trendy. And that's true. It is trendy. That is a good question. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you on that. I know there was some discussion around it, but I really don't know where that is at right now with Jakarta EE11. Unfortunately, I haven't stayed as up to date on that discussion as I probably should have. So, from Hans, will the Jakarta project work to get JBoss EAP to keep up with them, as 8 with the 10 support is still to be finalized? You're welcome, Vincent. Another good question. I'm not sure if Jakarta project is necessarily going to work directly with JBoss EAP to get this, to get them to keep up or not. It's always good to nudge, but I'm not sure if they will do that or not. That's really not in the scope of the Jakarta EE project to get other projects on board. But of course, if JBoss EAP wants to keep up and remain relevant, they are going to have to. And likewise with any other APIs that are older and not yet updated to work with EE10. So good question, though. Any other questions? If you think of something in the future, you can always get me on Twitter or Mastodon. You can see my handles there. You can reach me on GitHub. Got lots of repositories out there. You can check out some examples. I'll be putting this code on GitHub as well, so that you can play with this example for the reservations if you'd like. The employee example is already there that I took from a previous presentation that I did with Edwin Works. Edwin and I had done that presentation a few times in the past, and it showed how nicely you can use Jakarta EE with microprofile. So thanks, Edwin. So if anyone has any further questions, I'll feel free to answer them at this time. Otherwise, I appreciate you attending the J Champions Conference Day 2. I think it's turning out well so far. Hi, Constantine. I think I've got a question from James. Maybe exposing the schema via API calls to help interface to other systems. Yep, that would be useful. You'd be able to definitely interface to other systems a lot easier if the schema was exposed. And then you're very welcome, Sebastian, for the information. I hope that everyone found this useful. I'll be putting these slides on probably SlideShare as well, so that if you want to review the slides later on, I'll be posting them, and I'll go ahead and I'll put a post out on Twitter once they're available. Yes, happy weekend. So thank you, everybody, for attending the J Champions Conference Day 2 and attending my session. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to speaking with many of you in the future to learn how you're using Jakarta EE10 and how well it's working for your projects.